What Nerud once was is presented to us as a beacon of unity and cooperation, an example of the wonders a civilization can reach when its people band together and work towards a unified goal. Any who might have visited Nerud in its prime would have had little issue with this image, the gleaming towers and advanced technology, a visual representation of the great heights this feigned unity could achieve. However, if one looks closely, they can find the cracks that betray the truth of what Nerud once was. The cruelty of existing as part of a society is that not all are created equal in their position of power. It is a hard truth that any culture that exists on a grand scale requires people to tend to the mundane and menial work that keeps normal life running smoothly for everyone. The great machine of progress must never stop, and for Nerud, this creed was more than a philosophy, it was their life force. The responsibility of maintaining life and all that it required was assigned to a class of Drazir known as the Ofildi. Overseen by House Riggle, the Ofildi outnumbered any other class of Drazir by several degrees. Despite their numbers and clear importance to the Drazir way of life, the Ofildi were forced into a position very close to servitude, with little recognition or reward for their efforts. The space worker gloves read, "It is said that the Seekers are the heart of the Drazir, the Astropaths are sight, the Zul are thoughts, and the Fetir are strength." The Ofildi were often omitted from this proverb, but without hands, the Drazir could accomplish nothing. Unlike the other classes in their houses, which specialized in certain fields and further honed their skills and crafts, the Ofildi were forced merely to perform work without the freedom of self-development. Any work that was needed, under any conditions that demanded it. We know from items like the stasis score that the Drazir had reached the point in which they could alter genetic code, enhance physical and mental abilities, and even mix biology and technology without the usual side effects. It raises the question as of why a people with technology advanced enough to create near-perfect machines, thinking AI, and all manner of scientific wonders would still need their own to perform the dangerous work that was required to maintain the ship. Of course, their knowledge was put to use for the Ofildi, but only to enhance them in so much that it would allow them to do their work, never to replace them or to alleviate the effort. From the space worker legs we see, despite being seen as the least of the Drazir, great care was taken to protect and preserve the Ofildi. A life form's utility does not determine its worth. Life itself does that. A strange description considering what we've learned so far. This item signifies the potential propaganda that was used by the upper classes to paint themselves as more caring and interested in the well-being of the working class. We'll see some more examples of this later. Ofildi were assigned to many tasks across the ship. One of the more dangerous they had to endure was traversing the outside of the vessel in order to fumigate against potential life forms from their homeworld. For this, items like the space worker suit were built, which were equipped with magnetic attachments and protective materials, providing some level of safety for whatever unlucky soul had to climb onto the outside of the moving behemoth to get rid of parasites. The reverse boosting gem offers us a more insightful look on how the Ofildi were actually seen. This ring allows the user to slowly regenerate health after they have taken serious damage. These were fashioned for Drazir laborers who had to work on extreme outer and inner regions of Nerud, where radiation and other dangers were common. It kept most of them alive. They would be allowed to suffer tremendous amounts of pain and damage under the excuse that their bodies could be regenerated, or in the worst of situations, replaced. Of course, no group can withstand this sort of punishment without there being backlash. This too was taken into consideration by the Drazir. A drug known as xenoplasm was administered to Ofildi on a regular basis. The primary purpose was to suppress any outside stimulation to the Ofildi and keep them in a constant state of focus and efficiency. In essence, numbing the people into a state where all they could and would experience was the work that was assigned to them. Unsurprisingly, this drug created by the Zool class was highly addictive. This was not by accident, for the Drizir do not make anything without intent. The xenoplasm would lock the Ofildi into a cycle of addiction where the drugs they craved became the work they were forced to do. A clever and cruel way to instill efficiency in your workers and ensuring the work never stopped. Nerude, after all, was built upon the creed of perpetual progress and expansion, and such a goal cannot be achieved by allowing those that build the great works to stop, even for a moment. At some point, the Ofildi discovered that a byproduct of the propulsion engines that powered Nerude could be used to partially counteract the effects of xenoplasm. They found themselves ingesting what is essentially fuel residue in order to activate their nervous system once more, in order to feel something other than the labor that was placed upon them. The substance was named Flare, and was quickly banned by the leaders of Nerude after several flare-related deaths. It would not be hard to imagine that those deaths may have been self-inflicted. Once an Ofildi found itself aware of the situation it existed in, it saw no other choice. These deaths then would be used as a deterrent to stop any other Ofildi from using the counteractive drug. Indeed, we can recognize that the Drizir worked hard to hide all the ugly sides of their culture. However, history remembers, and due to the longevity of their people, and beings like the Custodian, it made it impossible to cover everything up. The vice scripts read, "It is a blessing that in all of our millennia of travel, the Ofildi never once rebelled. Not because they feared the Fatir, for the Ofildi outnumbered the Fatir 10-1 and had access to potent weapons of their own, but because the Ofildi were unified in the purpose with all the Drizir." This is yet another interesting item, because it lies to us as visitors to this world. We know this is a lie, because the Ofildi did rebel during Nerude's existence. Before the current Custodian, there was another version. Many centuries ago, the first Custodian was created for a similar purpose to the current one. It was to act as a caretaker and assistant to the Drizir and their goals. In hubris, the Drizir believed they had succeeded in creating the Custodian on their first try. They allowed it full access to the core of Nerude and all of the machinery that existed on the ship, which it then used to try to overtake the Drizir. We do not know exactly why the first Custodian turned, what caused it to attempt to destroy its creators. Perhaps it was driven to insanity by the work that was required of it. Perhaps it was a fault in its programming. Regardless, in an instant, it used all the technology it had available in order to make its move. In that same moment, the Ofildi saw their chance. Those that had managed to retain their sanity and identity took up arms when the Custodian rose up. They desired more than the lives assigned to them, the torture and numbness prescribed so that their unified goal of Nerude could continue to be fulfilled. It was a massacre. The Fatir, the warrior class of Nerude, had been preparing for centuries for such an event. When the first Custodian and the Ofildi took arms, the Fatir had already loaded their weapons. Despite the greater numbers of the Ofildi and the technology wielded by the Custodian, the Fatir were trained for a singular purpose: combat. They were ecstatic to finally put their skills to use. The uprising supposedly was quelled in a short while. The first Custodian was dismantled and put to purpose in other places. We find what remains of his memory cores scattered across Nerude, and even get to partially interact with an aspect of its personality inside the Terminus station. Here we get to experience a small aspect of what the Drizir faced during the rebellion. What remains of the Custodian, now a broken and insane personality. Of the Ofildi that rose up, there is little sign. The truth of their fate is found on the energy diverter. The Ofildi who joined the first Custodian in its uprising were not granted clemency. The Seekers dealt with them and their progenies swiftly and humanely. Not even records of their names endure. Not even their names remain. This is possibly the strongest sign to the truth of Neruda. How they have altered their own history to fit the image they wanted to present to the general public. They wanted to be seen as benevolent and unified to any potential race they encountered. In reality, they hid or destroyed what they could not control, learning only what was seen as useful and discarding any lessons that did not fit their mold. When seen in this light, it is little surprise they found themselves destroyed by their own hand. Had Alepsis Torah not done it, surely another of their own choices would have. But this is just one part of the story of Neruda. Much more happened to the Drizir before they ever laid eyes on Alepsis Torah. That will be a story for another time.